The last year has seen a lot of concern about global trade. That started particularly in March of 2018 with Donald Trump basically starting to ramp up a trade war, particularly with China. But he also had in his sights, for example, putting tariffs on autos coming into the US, which could affect countries like Japan and Europe. Now, of course, since about December, some of those fears have started to fade as the Chinese and the US have started to talk, and it looks as if, despite all the argy-bargy, lots of noise along the way, that they're heading towards some sort of deal. It may not be perfect, but it does look as if the Chinese will cut tariffs, import more from the US, and more substantially introduce protections around intellectual property and make it easier for foreign companies, obviously in this case particularly American companies, to do business in China. So those things I think will come as a relief when they ultimately, sign a trade deal. The question then becomes, will Donald Trump then pivot back to Europe and say, well, my Commerce Department has just released a report. He got that report back in mid-February. He's due to decide what to do with it by mid-May, and it's quite likely that that report said, yes, there is a threat to US security in relation to autos, so maybe you could put tariffs on imports of automobiles from other countries. And of course, Europe would bear the big brunt of that along with Japan. So that may happen. I think it's unlikely though, and there's several reasons for that. Firstly, Donald Trump has wanted to get a resolution with China because he wants to get re-elected next year. The last thing he wants is for share markets to be in a bear market, unemployment to be rising because he's created all this mayhem around a trade war. Secondly, there's little public support in the US, and there's not much support in Congress for having a trade war with Europe. Maybe there was against China, but certainly not against Europe. Now, thirdly, America's trade deficit with Europe is a fraction the size of that with China. So when you put all those things together, the argument to embark on a trade war over autos with Europe, I think, is actually quite weak. And I think there'll be lots of argy-bargy noise around this issue, but I think at the end of the day, it's just a negotiating tactic. Ultimately, Donald Trump will come up with some sort of deal with Europe as well. And the last thing he wants is for these things to hang over his head as he goes into next year's presidential election where he wants to get re-elected.